Born of local farmers and businessmen dreamers, and developed from narrow-gauge routes to being owned by mighty railroad moguls, the Westside Line in Oregon's Willamette Valley, much like its track profile, is a roller coaster history of highs and lows. This film is being included in the ongoing Albany Series because, as of today, every rail car that rolls over this line does so having come through Albany first, just like these other branches and towns that require their rail service through the vital rail hub of Albany. I have made many fan trips over the last year to see for myself what trains, industries, and rolling stock venture to the west side of the Willamette Valley. We will see much of the current operations by Portland and Western over the main line and the branches. We'll even take a peek of areas of old right-of-way that have long seen their last train. I hope you're ready for some old-style backwoods railroading, operating in the modern glossy orange flare of the Portland and Western. These trains venture into Oregon's mecca for giant wooden trestles, which span seemingly endless creeks, rivers, and valleys. So join me now as we tour Oregon's branch line on stilts, the Westside Line. Corvallis Junction is where today's Westside lines tap the outside rail network. For the majority of its operation, Southern Pacific Trains ran the line until February 22, 1993, when SP signed a lease agreement with newly formed Willamette and Pacific Railroad. Willamette and Pacific, under the Genesee and Wyoming corporate paint and banner, took over 184 miles of Southern Pacific's 700-plus miles of Western Oregon branch lines. On this June morning, a Westsider, Train 81, is early on in its return trip to Whiteson, Oregon. The train left Albany with 3 blocks of cars behind the 4 engines. The head block of cars is currently being handed over to the Corvallis switcher. A hopper and several center beams will be plucked from the train and taken to customers in the vicinity of Corvallis. I do have a video in the works highlighting this job, which sadly has recently been abolished, but not before I was able to capture it ambling through its chores. The switcher job couldn't withstand the closure of a lumber mill, key to its operational necessity. The other 2 blocks of cars making up the train that will continue north are destined for the Mack switcher and the Willamina job. Only 2 years after the formation of Willamette and Pacific, the name was absorbed into the Portland and Western Railroad to create one company out of 2, but trains would not change appearance as sharp orange and black paint continued to be applied to old SP Power and other cast-off Class 1 engines. There was a pleasant surprise in this engine consist, one of the final runs of a Willamette and Pacific Classic on its original home rails, the 1801. At Lewisburg, the tracks follow the form of the land, leading to a 10-mile-per-hour permanent speed restriction over the small wooden trestle crossing Mountain View Creek at the bottom of this hill. Once clear, the train begins to resume the 25-mile-per-hour track speed, which most of the west side observes. In fact, the back of this track sign to the left is the engineer's indication for a track speed change, which he can begin once the full train is clear of the 10-mile-per-hour limits. The train is climbing one of the steeper grades of the line at 0.6%, which will continue for about 2.5 miles. Adair Village was home to Camp Adair from 1942 to 1946 and Army training grounds during World War II. The tracks were rerouted around the compound, and the new alignment can be seen curving back into the old one here at Suver. The Westsider wasn't the only train that would travel north of Corvallis, as here the Corvallis Switcher makes a run for Rickreall. Agricultural customers here receive a variety of rolling stock on a short siding to address several shipping needs, from inbound chemicals to outbound loaded goods. The majority of the year, trains run in mostly darkness, as we see here at Suver. An October morning sun hasn't yet risen. The head and boxcars have plywood for a silent floors customer in Newburgh. As rail fans step away from the Class 1 main lines, particularly the parallel Union Pacific Brooklyn sub to the east of here, every car is important to the viability of a branch line's survival. And because of this fact, regional railroads have proven to be much better stewards of these lines nationally, saving lines like this from becoming bike paths and weed patches. Customers like Hampton Lumber and Willamina require many cars, which is where these center beams are headed. They, along with other Willamina cars, always bring up the rear of the Westsider. Independence has a stint of street running down South 2nd Street. This town was once the junction for the Valley and Siletz Railroad with Southern Pacific. Today, only a couple of agricultural spurs on the south side of town require occasional cars. Moving north of Independence, track speed has increased again, as we'll see our opening train highball through the countryside at Rogers Road. Up ahead is Girlinger Junction, where the Dallas branch cuts off the west side. Let's see what remains of the short branch, and what, if any, customers still ship on the line. Girlinger is a tough spot to get into in the middle of farmers' fields between Independence and Derry. It was once an at-grade crossing where the Salem Falls City and Western crossed the north-south route of the Westside line, which all would ultimately fall under SP control. The line was purchased by SP July 1, 1915, and it was renamed the Dallas Branch. The tracks were removed from here to Salem due to redundancy and lack of traffic. SP cut off this section in the 1970s since the rails fell mostly dormant after 1964. A short section of track remains, held down by this aging assortment of passenger equipment. SP intended for this line to be included in the Southern Pacific Red Electric system, although this expansion did not develop and the route was never electrified. We're standing at the corner of Union Street and Front Street in Salem, where the line began. Right here, the Dallas Branch cut west over a still-standing steel bridge over the Willamette River. Though through trains stopped running in the 60s, the Salem local would venture to West Salem across the river until 1980, when SP removed the Front Street industrial trackage. For a short time after that, until tracks were removed, the Burlington Northern took over the West Salem Industries, since its tracks were still connected to the bridge. Today, though it appears it could still handle any train, only pedestrians use the old lift bridge. At Gerlinger Junction, a Y is still used on the Salem side of the Westside Main. On the other side, the Dallas Branch sweeps off to the west. Not far down the line, it cuts between silos from agricultural shippers at Rick Rial. Grain silos that look like they're straight out of a Walters catalog have an overgrown spur that haven't seen rail service in longer than I know. Nevertheless, on this late summer afternoon, headlights from the Corvallis local switcher appear on the Dallas Branch. This is the only time I've ever seen a train on this line. And it has 4 covered hoppers in tow for the customer on the other side of the tracks, Nutrien Ag Solutions. It was a fortunate day for me to choose to follow the Corvallis job. A good reason for this would also be for the soon dissolution of the job itself. Now, finding this service in daylight is assuredly rare, as switching here would fall to the night crew of the Westsider in all likelihood. But today we're here as the one-man crew remotely operates the PNWR 2005 toward the Highway 99 crossing. Being a remote control operator standing on the point, no horn cadence need be sounded at the crossing, as technically the operator is protecting his own shove. While the operator prepares to spot the industry, let's look further down the line. Outside Dallas to the east at Orr's Corner Road, Portland and Western has stored a string of company-owned log cars. In the last few years, the logging trains that frequented Portland and Western have subsided. These cars, which were so commonly seen between Eugene and Rainier, Oregon, have been sidelined and are due to see the cutter's torch within the year. It is a sad sight to see these unique cars relegated to the pages of history, but such is the long-repeated saga of railroad operations. And it's for that reason that I continue to find time to go out trackside and document what trains are doing before that, too, is but a memory. On a better day in 2022, these cars are seen at Albany's OE Yard, ready to travel north via Salem to Tigard and on to Rainier on the Astoria branch. Further down the track, it's only the rails. No cars whatsoever are moving, stored or not, to Dallas. Remnants of large logging mills, lumber yards, and tall grain silos and mills remain, but are fading or nothing but a shadow of the past. Portland and Western engineer Lou Thelen took this shot of none other than 1801 one night, switching at this very location. We're currently looking north along what was a narrow gauge railway that connected Portland to Airlie with 3-foot gauge track called the Oregonian Railway. Completed in 1881, this line set the original groundwork for much of what would be the north end of the Westside line and the Willamina Branch. By 1890, SB had control of the line, and by 1893 it was standard gauged. The crossing here of the Salem Falls City and Western with the Oregonian Railway made a complex network of track at one time. Eventually, Dallas was the terminus of track on a single branch from tracks laid by the Salem Falls City and Western. Southern Pacific and Portland and Western continued providing service to Dallas Mills until the early 2000s. This switch marks the approximate location that the Salem Falls City and Western turns southwest for another 14 miles into the deep woods of the coastal mountains. It wasn't until the early 1960s that service all the way to Falls City was discontinued. Though it has been years since a train rolled into Dallas, the tracks remain mostly in place, and it wouldn't be so difficult for service to return should the right shipper rise up. For now, let's go back and see what is running today. Within the hoppers, Nutrien is possibly receiving fertilizer or potash. These chemicals and minerals are used in the farming industry to help with soil nutrition, protection of crops for better crop yield. Behind lumber products, agriculture is the second most important industry, feeding Willamette Valley Railroad branch lines. Typically, at customers like this, a receiving bay under the track between the rails brings the product via conveyor into the silos, and when one is finished, a mechanical pulley or tractor will move the car to the next hopper. I was glad I got to speak with the conductor this day to learn he would be making this delivery, which is seasonal and somewhat rare. Now it's back to Corvallis for him, concluding a busy day.
Adios.
Time to go home.
Though the Dallas branch has never been a major contributor, it's always good to see even small rail connections like this feeding the greater rail network. Let's hope that this line and others like it continue to see not only survival, but future growth. Moving on, it isn't far, just around the bend to Derry, as we'll head back to the main line. From here on north, the route becomes more hilly and, in my opinion, more picturesque. The train will be seen here from the Highway 22 overpass as sunlight begins to bathe the valley on a chilly October morning. Here at Derry, a fog bank obscures the view down the line, illustrating the surprising fact that this stretch of track toward the end of Southern Pacific's control saw no through trains between here and Whiteson. Instead, the track sat quietly with stored surplus cars. It wasn't until the line was leased to the Willamette and Pacific that it began seeing through trains once again. At around milepost 719.5, the line crosses Highway 99. The tracks will stay to the west of the highway until Whiteson. This steer is enjoying a serene, warm day, but will soon be making a risky decision with its life. Technically, it's the coolest time of day as the temperature drops to its dew point and the air is saturated with water until it can no longer hold it as gas. But visually, it's a beautiful mix of light, fog, and machine. Recent track work at milepole 722 is noticeable, bringing with it a 10-mile-per-hour slow order. The tracks rise and fall with the hills, testing the skills of engineers as they balance their train's internal buff forces, which, if ignored, can result in broken knuckles, especially if the train is a lengthier one, as this one is. Within the head Mac switcher portion of this Westsider are open hoppers bound for Cascade steel, along with the gondolas, covered hopper, 90-foot flats, and bulkheads. Up ahead, the tracks reach McCoy, where a head house for a grain elevator can be seen rising above the trees. Along with the hilly landscape, the right-of-way sees small grade changes up to almost 0.5%. Between June and October, a slow order has been assigned for McCoy, as evidenced by the slower train speed here today. A small meandering creek bed dips under another wooden trestle as the warm sun has burned away the fog, at least here. A gloomier day sees a lengthy train tiptoe across Ash Swale. Peaceful Amity is disturbed twice a day by Portland and Western air horns, this time as the returning Westsider approaches town. Amity only watches the trains pass in spite of having a couple rotting spurs, which once fed the Southern Pacific, when this line would see 4 through trains a day, 2 in each direction. Rounding the bend is the first train we saw at Corvallis Junction. Train 81 was running late on this June day, as the crew was changed out before Amity this morning due to the hours of service law, so finishing the trip to Whiteson is the Max Witcher crew. Today's crew, running more on schedule, has plenty of time to reach Whiteson. Skirting along the western flank of the Eola Hills, the engine notches out to lift a healthy consist over the final hill before reaching Whiteson. The top of the hill here is very evident as the tracks immediately drop down to the Westsider's final station stop. When completed in 1880 by Henry Villard as the Oregon Western Railroad, trains weren't quite this long or heavy, so this original grading reflects those particular standards, which crews contend with using learned skills and train handling. For the final stretch into Whiteson, a lengthy consist rolls down the hill. The round trip is nearly complete as the night Westsider crew prepares to either tie down the train or hand it off to the Mac Switcher and Willamina crews, depending on how late they roll into Whiteson. And that brings this chapter to a close, as Job 81 concludes another trip through the splendor of Western Oregon scenery. We've got a lot more to explore coming up, though. I hope you can join me as we roll on further down the west side. Whiteson was once an important junction and an at-grade crossing of the narrow-gauge Oregonian Railway, which once traveled from the left to the right, crossing the standard-gauge Western Oregon Railroad, right where I'm currently standing. In SP days, before the through train stopped, the Westsider would still have Newburgh, Rex Hill, Lake Oswego, and a trip across the Willamette into Portland's Brooklyn Yard ahead. In later years, Portland and Western would send the Mac Hauler over the Rex Hill between Tigard and McMinnville. Today, all traffic rolls south from McMinnville to Albany, and Rex Hill in between is silent, rusting and cut off, with a major trestle at Sherwood that has since burned to the ground. Before the trestle burned, Portland and Western cut off the traffic in 2004, moving away from the steep and curving route, opting for the operational pattern we see today. The narrow-gauge Oregonian Railway laid the groundwork for important, even currently used lines. Whiteson is still an important junction in that it is here that the Willamina Branch begins, and there is a siding, team track, and a Y. Argon tanks get unloaded into trucks here and provide a regular customer to the team track. The crew base for the Westsider, Max Switcher, and Willamina job is McMinnville, one of 5 crew base locations for Portland and Western crews. The others being Albany, Eugene, Tigard, and St. Helens. Back-to-back 4-axle power will be set aside for the Willamina crew, left on the Y. The 1801 is about to finish out its Portland and Western working days, switching in McMinnville. The head-end cars will finish the trip north behind the Max Switcher locomotives, while the rear of the train will be left for the Willamina job, which will soon be departing afterwards. Leaving Whiteson, the longest trestle currently used on the Westside line crosses the South Yamhill River and Pacific Highway 99 West. Little has changed about this bridge in the last 122 years since this 1902 photo was taken. As not only a member of the railroad craft, but also a fan of observation, the interest is always enhanced when finding those timeless connections to the past. And all things considered, our industry at its roots is much unchanged in its fundamental character since steam whistles echoed across this floodplain. One big difference in today's trains from 1900 is the large number of cars headed to single customers. This train is a great example, as every car is headed to the massive Cascade Steel rolling plant in McMinnville. Cascade Steel isn't the only rail shipper the Mack Switcher services. However, no other shipper meets the impressive volume of cars the steel mill requires. Several other shippers receive weekly or as-needed service. Case in point is the 2 boxcars on the head end of this train for Silent Floors and Newburgh. Another regular customer is Purina Feeds on the outside of town. Cylindrical hoppers are regularly switched here. Today, 3 empties will be pulled in exchange for 1 load. The cars were then left behind on this day as the 3369 headed light to switch out cars at Cascade Steel. This sizable trestle is in the middle of McMinnville proper, crossing Cozine Creek. The Portland and Western McMinnville crew base and offices reside here in an old SP passenger depot. The depot once served SP's extensive red electric passenger service. Over the years, feasibility studies have been done looking to bring passenger rail back to McMinnville, although they fell flat. Any hopeful passenger waiting on the platform today won't be getting a ticket stamped anytime soon. Another huge trestle just north of town crosses the North Yamhill River. Not even a mile further down the line, we have St. Joseph, mostly the name for a railroad junction and not an incorporated town per se. But it's here that the SP line split away from the north-south route to Forest Grove and started east toward Portland. Today, a Y is still in operation, but Forest Grove tracks beyond have been torn up since the 80s. The train will come down to St. Joe to switch or store cars and occasionally bring tank cars to a customer east of the Y. Once in a while, boxcars will be brought as far as Newburgh but those two are the only customers shipping north of Cascade Steel currently. Long ago, trains could continue north on this leg of the Y toward Forest Grove, which is currently storing tanks for the chemical spur. The Y is in use should the crew need to turn a locomotive or run around a car. Early in its shift, this Max switcher has loads of finished steel products to shove out of the way until the end of its shift, when all the cars for Albany will be brought back to Whiteson, as those cars and engines will reunite with the Willamina for the trip south. St. Joseph is where the standard gauge Oregon and California ended construction when rails reached here in 1872 from Forest Grove. Henry Villard then acquired control, and from there built the track to McMinnville and Whiteson under the name Western Oregon Railroad. The tracks then reached Corvallis in 1880, completing all the Westside line that we've observed today. The Rex Hill trackage was built by the narrow gauge Oregonian Railway before it was purchased by Oregon and California Railroad under SP's control in 1887, and then converted to standard gauge. The locomotive is off to switch cars at Cascade Steel, and I wish I could follow it into the mill. The Max switcher is a tough job to record. Most of its work is done in private areas and property. The Willamina job, however, is just the opposite. The Willamina local job is taking charge of its train at Whiteson. The crew just finished spotting argon tank cars on the team track off of the siding and is returning to its cars on the main line. This scenic branch is one of the most pastoral and timeless branches in the state. The 18.7-mile line demands service every weekday, making it one of the easiest lines to observe, especially during the longer days of summer. Down the middle of the Y here is where the narrow gauge rails of the Oregonian Railway ran for SP control. Salt Creek was an immediate challenge to track layers leaving Whiteson, who constructed a trestle here to reach across to the fertile farming land on the other side. And today the wooden timbers seem to be becoming more forest than railroad, but twice a day, 5 days a week, this scene features the Portland and Western. One of the sharpest curves anywhere on the railroad demands a gentle touch from the engineer on the throttle. When SP purchased the narrow-gauge Oregonian line, it promptly standard-gauged it in the 1890s with intention to electrify the route and include it with its red electric passenger service, but those plans weren't realized. Even so, the Willamina Branch has been consistently profitable. A surprising number of flat cars and idlers for the Stella Jones Pole Yard in Sheridan are headed out on this short train, with only one center beam for Hampton. Usually, the opposite is true. Broadmead is where the junction once was for the Early Branch, which went south through Perrydale and Dallas. When constructed, this was the main intended route, and the route to Sheridan and Willamina would come later. The Willamette Valley rail landscape was in large part influenced by narrow-gauge lines. As beautifully historized by Ed Austin, the Early Branch was cut back to Perrydale by 1934 and was left with barely 2 miles to serve grain elevators at the end of the rickety track. Today, there's no evidence of the line's existence. We see here from Ed's book, one of the last SP trains to ever venture out to Perrydale. This curve changes the branch line's direction from a north-south to an east-west route toward the coastal hills and tall timbers that stand as the reason for its continued operational vitality. The large farmers' warehouses that stand along the line, however, next to torn-up or rusting spurs, such as the one the train is currently passing, have moved away from rail car shipping on the Willamina Branch. Ballston at milepost 740.5 is just about at the midpoint of the line, and it's another example of a station where boxcars and hoppers were once loaded. It's also one of the few remaining spurs that remain serviceable, however today, mainly for storing maintenance of way equipment or bad order cars that fail en route. The quiet hamlet becomes the target for blaring air horns twice each weekday, and the neighborhood dogs make known their displeasure at the disturbance. Between Sheridan and Willamina, the tracks are once again carried over the South Yamhill River on this combination trestle through Truss Bridge. At Shipley, the train has just passed the first shipper on the line, the Stella Jones Pole Treatment Yard, which we will see later. Coming into the yard limits of Willamina, the train eases down to 10 miles per hour from the track speed of 25, seen displayed on the speed limit board to the right. The yard limit board on the left emphasizes that train movements be made looking out for trains ahead and be able to stop within half of the range of vision. This, of course, was certainly more important in years past when the Willamina and Grand Ronde Railroad shared the yard and interchange here. The track arrangements are neither complex nor expansive at the end of the branch. The yard is comprised mainly of 3 body tracks for storage, switching, and running around cars. The old Willamina and Grand Ronde Railroad tracks, which connected its namesake towns, cuts south and west from the yard. This shoreline was a relative newcomer to the Oregon Railroad scene with its late arrival date in 1922. Meanwhile, the local drills the lead, sorting cars for the mill and also getting any flats for Stella Jones switched out for later. The outbound empties will then be left on the south yard track for later, and the locomotive will head to Hampton Lumber Light Power. While the crew was busy switching, I decided to see what there was left of the old Willamina and Grand Ronde Railway. Today, only about a mile or less of track is available for car storage. Just short of this crossing of Highway 18 outside of town, the tracks have been removed from service. However, the rails and ties remain in place for about 5.2 miles to Fort Hill. It was constructed in 1922 in connection with the Spalding Miami Lumber Company. Under its original ownership, it didn't exist long, only 32 years before it was acquired by the Longview Portland and Northern in 1954. 26 years after that, in 1980, its name was reborn with the fledgling 8-mile-long railroad was purchased by a private party, by which time the tracks were operational only to Fort Hill, 5.2 miles from Willamina. Let's watch an old film of the reborn Willamina and Grand Ronde with a short freight pulled behind XSP SW1200 2274. These lumber loads from the sole shipper on the line at Fort Hill are headed for interchange at this date with the Southern Pacific in Willamina. A look at the station and shops at the end of the line in Grand Ronde show the original 56 to 60-pound rail, which would never be replaced before abandonment. From Grand Ronde to Fort Hill, the tracks were finally removed in 1985. And it was around the same time that the rest of the line got an uplift from 60-pound rail to 90-pound rail. This station remains in decent shape and stands against the odds as a rare specimen along the old grade where a small contingent of railroad men and engines called home at one time. It would seem some of the old rails still stand tall in honor of the service trains once provided this small community. Even the reborn Willamina and Grand Ronde finally faded away for good when sold to Hampton Industries and operated by the new Willamette Pacific in 1995. Service continued until 2004 when Hampton finally closed the Fort Hill mill, rendering the line silent. Thankfully, such is not the case here in Timbertown, USA, Willamina.
slave at the sawmill. Talk about a poor boy, talk about a poor boy, never saw a dollar bill. Well, my work was so hard at the sawmill. Think about a poor boy, think about a poor boy, when you go to right your will. Well, see my teardrops falling down. My wife left this sawmill town. She said sawmill life had been a sin, 'cause the gravy was too thin. I can't work no more at the sawmill. Mercy on a poor boy, mercy on a poor boy, let me have a dollar bill.
The gravy might have been too thin in the lumber industry in the 1970s, but through mergers and closures, it would seem the big mills are doing well today, and certainly helping towns like Willamina survive through the years. This Hampton lumber mill has one of the highest board outputs in Oregon's Willamette Valley, as we see today's consist of weighed down 80-foot center beams stretching far down the line. "11 loads of board lumber for one day is an impressive number. To put it into perspective, let's take a look back at my Oregon Pacific video.
You're going to go in with me? So we basically spot 11 empties for them, and they load them every week.
So for the RSG mill in Liberal, it's 11 loads per week, and that isn't uncommon. The loads will wait at the east end of the yard now, while the fresh empties are shoved towards the mill. Hampton Lumber has 4 Oregon mill locations: Portland, Tillamook, Warrenton, and Willamina. There are an additional 3 mills in Washington and 2 in British Columbia. Willamina is the original, bought by Bud Hampton in 1942. Aptly named, Willamina Creek gurgles through town this pleasant summer day, where it will soon join the Yamhill River, finishing its journey from the Coast Range. The fresh lumber from the Coast Range, however, is just beginning its journey to markets abroad. But first, the engine will pull the extra cars back into the yard until tomorrow, when the sequence will be repeated. Between Shipley and Sheridan, a spur branches into the pull yard of Stella Jones. The return train switches the customer pulling and spotting flat cars as needed. Today, a turn must be made on the idler car, and one load is ready to pull. The idler car is now pushed on top of the 90-foot flat car. The longest poles exceed even this length of car, requiring the idler to provide overhang space for the longer load. Because this flat car has bulkhead ends, it is allowable to be next to the locomotive. If a flat car does not have bulkheads and has a load, it cannot be next to an occupied car or engine due to the danger of the shiftable load. Thankfully, the long June day sunlight provided me an incredible golden hour experience following this train to Whiteson. Each trip I make to the corners of Oregon's rail network makes me just appreciate more these cars I see wind up on my own UP trains, carrying cargo to markets far away. I'm also grateful you've joined me on the journey. We will see you again soon, friends. Lots coming down the pike.